Hello. Just a quick sort of word of explanation. My last few videos have been a little bit mixed up because I had some uploaded but I just didn't get around to sort of editing the title and so on. So the one I'm talking about, the wealth poverty issue, and I'm lying on the bed, that actually was uploaded before the last one on my timeline, if that makes sense. Even though it's come up as the last one to appear. Anyway, it's not really important. Just thought I'd explain that in case it looked a bit unusual. There is a number of things I want to talk about. I want to talk about the 30th anniversary of the Berlin Wall. So watch out for that video. I think there's a lot to say about that. I'm going to do a few film reviews. But for now I want to talk about pressure. Pressure in the modern world. And I'm going to talk a bit about myself here because I could talk about any number of things regarding pressure in the modern world. So it makes sense to narrow it down a little bit and talk about my own experience on some level. I'm not intending to reveal everything here, but just touch on it. As a matter of record, as a matter of note, I should say, I think Britain is not an easygoing country. I think we have quite a fast pace of life. I think we're quite a pressurised society. More so, for example, than I would suggest France. Unless you live in Paris or Marseille, I would say France is a more easygoing sort of society. Partly perhaps because it's more rural. That may be a factor. And that may be also true of certain parts of the United States as opposed to big American cities. So I think there may be an urban-rural factor here. Britain is a largely urban society. I'd say at least 50% of British people live in big towns or cities, at least 50%. And if we include conurbations, then I'd say it's easily 50%. And even people who live in the countryside in Britain don't live more than 50 miles from a big town or city. So we are really an urban society. And this is comparable to Japan and South Korea. As in, we're a developed country and an urban society. Whereas France and the United States are developed countries, but they are not urban societies. We think of America, sometimes we think of the big cities, but most Americans live in small towns. Just really the East Coast, the West Coast, the Midwest belt and the Texas Triangle is the big cities and the Florida Panhandle. But most Americans probably live in small towns. With my own experience, I kind of mentioned in the previous video about the depression I'm going through, and I'm having big financial problems. I try not to let my personal issues dominate my channel, because as much as I think people might be interested in them, it's just not what, I want to use my channel to voice my opinions on things and to try and use that as a platform to talk about things that I think are important. I think I would bore myself, to be quite honest, if I always spoke about my own problems. But there's also, if I'm totally honest, a self-preservation thing. I'm aware that anyone can watch my videos. I put the settings to public, so I guess there is a degree of self-preservation there. I don't want judgment. But suffice to say, my own life at the moment is not that easy. It's I'm going through a time in my life where I feel a lot of uncertainty and enormous pressure. I may have alluded to this in the depression video, actually, I can't remember, but I just feel that I have no real easy choices at the moment, and financial worries is at the top of my list. I'm pretty much unemployed, although I've just had one of my old students approached me today. He wants to resume lessons, so that's good, but teaching online really isn't sustainable. So I feel enormous pressure from trying to get work. I'm applying for job after job after job, and it's a cycle, because if you have been out of work for some time, you're obviously going to have less experience in that period of time. And you could do voluntary work, or you could do like I'm doing this work, which is sort of self-employment, but it's difficult to show that to an employer because you don't have references. I'm thinking actually about volunteering in the charity shop again, simply for putting something on the CV and for kind of regenerating my till experience. I was told, for example, if you want to apply for a supermarket, they would look at least a year of paid recent experience. So they're quite stringent what they ask for. It doesn't matter if you have great teamwork, you can use the till, etc. They what they're really looking for is what's on your CV. So I feel a lot of people are disadvantaged. They may actually be very valuable to a company. They may be hard workers. They may be good at teamwork, etc. But they're held back because employers look at the CV and they won't give someone the time of day. That's very frustrating. I applied for a job recently on a railway company. I won't name the company because I don't want to get into any sort of, I don't know if there's any legal issues around that, but I applied for a railway company between Sunderland and London. It's a job I really wanted, just working on the kiosk there, and I didn't get it. And when I asked them for, like, if I could follow up what was the reason why, because they actually encouraged me to apply again. But how can I apply again if I don't know where I went wrong in the first place? Because they wouldn't give me a reason. They said, we are sorry, but at this stage in the application, we do not give further information. It might be a time management thing, but that seemed to me a bit flippant to say that on one hand, whilst on the other hand encourage me to apply. So you feel like you're constantly going up against a wall, and it is immensely frustrating, and it's immensely worrying. So as much as I try to relax these days, it's very, very difficult because I'm constantly worried about financial stability. Constantly. I'm not signing on at the moment. Some people might say that would be a way to get financial stability, or at least something coming in. But I made a conscientious choice that if I do that, I am totally surrendering myself to the mercy of the DWP, and anyone who's been through that will know what I'm talking about. And I have huge sympathy for people who have no choice. Maybe they have dependents, they have to sign on. For me, it's a difficult choice, but I chose not to do it because whilst I would get some money after a month, it's the soul destroying process of having to prove yourself time and time again, the threatening letters, the patronising stuff. I just think that it would send me over the edge and make a difficult situation even harder. So I opted not to do it. And I may regret that because I know signing on you get, like, I think it's working tax credits or something, or you get some accreditation. So maybe I'm being foolish, maybe it's a mistake not to do that. But I just know how I felt the last time I went through it, and I don't want to go through that again. But as a general point of observation, all the social divisions we're having doesn't help. I'm not just talking about me here, but the country. Brexit, the tensions that are coming about from that. People are very angry at the moment over a lot of issues. Then there's the whole Extinction Rebellion thing. The wider public is angry about that. They would say they're angry about what they see as inaction. So there's actually very little scope for people to sit back and say, let's just step back for a minute. Let's just calm down a little bit. I've just seen a video where Stephen Fry was talking about the problems of political correctness. I may make a separate video about that, but I think Fry gave a very balanced sort of analysis of how he saw it, and he pitched something that I think we are overlooking these days: the need for decency. And just, I think we all need to calm down to some extent. I'm not going to be a hypocrite. There are issues I feel very strongly about, and I'm not going to pretend that I can be sort of, oh well, let's sit down with a nice cup of tea and we'll just work our way through it. But social media does put up a barrier. We communicate in ways that we wouldn't in the real world, let's face it. I recently spoke to a friend from Singapore, and I'd taken issue with something she'd written, and I was quite angry because I jumped to conclusions about something she'd written. The subject doesn't really matter. Well, okay, I may as well explain. She's written something about Shamina Begum and how she felt that Britain was and other Western countries weren't fulfilling their humanitarian duty to take back young jihadists. Now, I got quite worked up by this because I took that to mean kind of sympathy for Shamina Begum. Well, I jumped to conclusions and I had quite a lengthy response. And, I wouldn't say it was a rant, but I was making it clear I wasn't happy with what I perceived her position to be. So she sent me a message, and we haven't spoken for a few years. And we were making small talk, just like she said, "Hello Nathan, how are you?" And I kind of knew that where this was going. I thought, okay, she's going to bring up what I've just said on her timeline. And I thought, well, okay, I'm going to try a different tactic here. Instead of this back to forth written sort of exchange, let's just have a conversation. Let's just talk. So I invited her to do a video chat, and to my pleasant surprise, she agreed. And we spoke about the issue we started off with small talk, just asking how each other were and so on. But we went into that and we had an in-depth talk, and it transpired I had somewhat misjudged her. I'd assumed that she was taking a certain position that she wasn't necessarily taking, or rather her position was more nuanced than I thought it was. She wasn't necessarily sympathising with Shamina Begum. So, having that face-to-face conversation, I did tell her I still more or less stood by the sentiments that I'd said in the post. It wasn't that it was insincere. It's just that I think people are very often, and this is left and right, willing to say things online that they wouldn't necessarily say to someone's face. And to me that's very cynical. I'm sort of thinking, well, if maybe I need to change my thinking on this. If I'm going to be so outspoken in comments, maybe I should have the integrity to, be that outspoken face to face. And I did tell her how I felt, but my tone was not the same as the comment, if that makes sense. And it was a very amicable talk. I have to say though, she was incredible. She opened up dialogue when a lot of people maybe would have just told me where to go. So that's a reflection on her, and my feelings about her have greatly elevated. I think she's a very decent, open-minded person. I'm not sure if I would do it, to be honest. If someone left me some angry comment about something I'd said and I thought they'd misunderstood me, I wouldn't necessarily be reaching out to them. So I have enormous respect that she could do that. But I think so much of this is about ego. We all want to be right. We all want to show that our position is right, our argument is right. I think Stephen Fry had actually made a point in his monologue where he said that the problem nowadays is people focus so much on being right, they're not focusing on what is actually effective. So people, and we all do it, I'm guilty of this, we want to prove the other person is wrong, rather than actually just listening to what they're saying. We get so ego driven, we get so wrapped up in our own way of thinking that we just want to prove the other person is wrong. Now, that doesn't mean we should sit on the fence with everything. I think it's good to have conviction. I think it's good to stand up for conviction, because if we didn't, to me that's not the way I want to live, always sitting on the fence. There are things I feel strongly about, and I do feel that I've given them thought. I do. But maybe sometimes I do let my anger supersede my dialogue. I would never threaten anyone. I would never harass someone or anything like that. But sometimes I do, let's just say bluntly, show my opinion. And sometimes I'm less than polite about it, if I'm being totally honest. If I think someone's talking rubbish, I'm more likely to say, I don't agree with you. Excuse me, I think you're talking rubbish, rather than, sorry, I don't agree with you. So I have a part to play. I know there's areas I can improve. But the reason I'm talking about all this dialogue and debate, I think it gets into the issue of pressure. Because especially with social media is so influential in our daily lives that it's hard to imagine a time when we didn't have it. And we think that, you open up your Facebook page, I'm sure I'm not the only one that feels this way, you see the notifications. Some of them may just be friends liking a post, but some of them may be someone responding to something you said on BBC News. And then you have a choice, I'll just ignore it. Or, I better stick up for what I said. And it's like this constant personal pressure. For what it's worth, I think, whilst I do think there's something to be said, like that example I gave with my Singaporean friend about dialogue, I also think there's something to be said for simply walking away sometimes. I don't think it's cowardice to kind of agree to disagree. I don't think it's cowardice to say, well, we're clearly not going to see common ground on this, so it's not worth the stress. But so often nowadays, debate does just go to the gutter. Because people get, I think the analogy Stephen Fry used was this Grand Canyon with the culture wars. And there is, unfortunately. People will automatically pigeonhole others like, you're a conservative, you're a liberal, you're a commie, you're a socialist. And I think in situations where people are describing themselves that way, that's fair game. But too often we do jump to conclusions about others. I've done it myself. I plead 100% guilty. We all do it. And I think I'll close with this. Talking about wider society, just day-to-day life. Very often the pressures that we face are because we're too hard on ourselves. That's one factor. But I also think too many people are, whilst there is compassion to be found in society, there is examples of great generosity and humanitarianism. I think too many people also won't kind of empathise. Too many people are so wrapped up in how they want to do things that they don't consider the other person's position. So I've often found myself getting irritated in shops when there's been bad service or just things done in a way that to me kind of break the mold. Someone asked me recently, by the way, and one of the comments was I disabled. Just for the record, I'm not diagnosed with anything. I've never been diagnosed, for example, with autism or anything like that, and I don't think I am. But I do sometimes wonder, I do think about things a lot. I do have that analytical trait that some people with autism do have. I have friends with autism, and from what they've described, I see some similarities in a way, I think, although I don't think it's the same situation exactly. For example, I do get worked up with things that maybe are quite trivial. Let's say, for example, I'll give a recent example of this. I collect the stamp cards in coffee shops so that on the 9th stamp I'll get my free coffee. Now, the last time I'd done it in Waterstones, the woman there, she said, there's not 9 stamps here, and I got quite irritated because it's just that one was kind of faded, and I actually pointed that out, and that bugged me more than it should. She sort of said, right, yeah, that's right. It bugged me because I thought she should have apologised or something. So things like that maybe bother me more than they should, if I'm totally honest. But then again, with my economy, when I get a stamp, I'm looking at the reward at the end. So if someone questions that, it's like, well, what's the point of having a loyalty card? So things like that maybe bug me more than they should. There's another thing that really irritates me is when you get one piece of advice, if you're going through some sort of course and I've done this a few times in my life where I've kind of taken on some sort of challenge. I'll give another practical example here. When I went to the boxing club in my city, our boxing club, one week we would get one piece of advice about a certain way that you would work out, And then the next week, another trainer would say, oh, that's bad for you, don't do it that way. So when you get mixed messages from people who are in a position of authority, that's irritating, because you're thinking, well, what do I do? This guy said one thing, this guy said another. So I find that a lot of the stress that we get in this world does come from other people. It comes from other people not really considering someone's position. I think we would all do well to put a little bit of empathy into someone else's position. I mean, when transport problems occur, I do sympathise with staff that have to deal with that. I do sympathise with the person behind the kiosk who has to deal with the delays and so on. But I also think they need to empathise with customers. I mean, I was caught up in that King's Cross disruption earlier this year. We all had to get off at, I think it was Peterborough Station. And what irritated me was the boards had certain information about the next trains, yet that just wasn't happening. So I asked the girl behind the counter, why are they saying that? And she kind of somewhat sarcastically said, oh, well, we'll have to change it then. But her tone was kind of a bit passive aggressive, and I didn't like it. So that's an example of, well, okay, maybe you're under pressure, but I'm the inconvenienced customer here, so, you know, change your attitude. It's like one of those things. I really, one of the reasons I get irritated when I'm applying for jobs and I'm not getting them is whenever I've had jobs, I've always valued politeness, I've always valued good customer service. And I'm not saying I'm the best employee in the world, but I have genuinely valued customer service. And I go into shops and it's sloppy customer service, and I'm thinking, why does this person have a job and I don't? Maybe it is jealousy, but I do feel a little bit resentful about that, because I'm thinking they're getting paid and they're just being rude, you know. So I do think a lot of pressure in this world comes from other people, and I think we owe it to ourselves to stop beating ourselves up, stop always saying, oh, I should have done this, I should have said this, I should have said that. I really think that we all need to find some sort of mechanism to calm down. Obviously, some people are going to be under a lot more pressure than others. Politicians are going to be under pressure coming up to the general election. The emergency services are always under pressure. Junior doctors face horrible pressures. So some people face more pressures than others. But you can also have pressure from unemployment. It's not work pressure in the sense that you're having to meet deadlines and so on, but it's pressure from constant worry about not having money. So it's a different kind of pressure, but it's still pressure because you're constantly worrying about the future. So I think a lot of people in our society face pressure, and I think we all owe it to ourselves to just, because the thing is, if we treat ourselves with respect, if we find a way to kind of cope in ourselves, then we're going to be more, I think, mature and positive in how we approach other people, and we'll gain a lot more self-confidence as well. So I think it's important. In my case, I need to sort out my sleeping pattern, and I need to have a point each day where I just really divorce myself from the world. No social media, no distractions, just some nice music, and just really relax, because I get angry a lot about injustices, about problems in society, more than I should, probably. And I don't think it's that I'm necessarily wrong about my views. It's just too much. I need to calm down sometimes, to be totally honest. I think we all do. I think we all need to just step back a little bit and think, maybe the problem is not as bad as we think it is. Really, Britain, chill out. And the final point, when we look at the happiest countries in the world, Bhutan, I believe, usually gets to the number one spot. It's not super rich, but quality of life is assessed not just by the size of the GDP, but the welfare of people. And that's something I think that countries like Britain need to focus a lot more on. And I do think the government has a role in that. Not by being the nanny state, but I think there needs to be more focus on mental health, on individual welfare, happiness, than an obsession about, oh, how well can you do in your place of work. There needs to be a focus on actual mental welfare, and I don't think it's entirely the government's responsibility, because that could get into the nanny state realm, but I think the government has a role. Okay, let me know your thoughts, and thanks for watching. Let me know if you have your own experiences with this.